Hi, this is another edition of Stuart Dahl Show, starring myself, Stuart Dahl. I am coming to you live from my house right here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. With the current temperature in Winnipeg is about 13 degrees, and it looks like Winnipeg's going to be getting some rain today, but oh well, it's Manitoba, what do you expect? So let's just get right into my show. Today, this is a very special edition of my show. Today is the 70th anniversary of the single largest and bloodiest battle in the history of warfare, the Battle of Stalingrad, which basically, and I'm going to be telling you about it in my episode today. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted from August 23rd, 1942 to February 2nd, 1943. It was a major battle in World War II where Nazi Germany and its allies fought the Soviet Union for control of the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, in southern Russia, on the eastern boundary of Europe. It was marked by the consistent close-quarters combat and direct assaults on civilians by air. It is often regarded as, like I was just saying, it's often regarded as the single largest and bloodiest battle in the history of warfare. The heavy losses inflicted on the German Wehrmacht made arguably the most strategically decisive battle of the whole war. Excuse me. It was a turning point in the European theater of World War II. German forces never regained the initiative in the east and withdrew a vast military force from the west to replace their losses. The German offensive to capture Stalingrad began in the late summer 1942 using the 6th Army and elements of the 4th Panzer Army. The attack was supported by intensive Luftwaffe bombing that reduced much of the city to rubble. The fighting disintegrated into building-to-building fighting, and both sides poured reinforcements into the city. By mid-November 1942, the Germans had pushed the Soviet defenders back at great cost into narrow zones generally along the west bank of the Volga River. On November 19, 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a two-pronged attack targeting the weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces protecting the German 6th Army flanks. The Axis forces on the flanks were overrun, and the 6th Army was cut off and surrounded in the Stalingrad area. Hitler ordered that the army stay in Stalingrad and make no attempt to break out. Instead, attempts were made to resupply the army by air and break the encirclement from the outside. Heavy fighting continued for another 2 months. By the beginning of February 1943, the Axis forces in Stalingrad had exhausted their ammunition and food, and the remaining elements of the German 6th Army surrendered. The battle lasted 5 months, 1 week, and 3 days. And that, what else am I gonna... Oh, and I'm also gonna talk about, some other, the end of the battle. This one was an operation... basically a German attempt led by Erich von Manstein. This one's called Operation Winterstorm. Soviet forces consolidated their position around Stalingrad, and fierce fighting to shrink the pocket began. Operation Winterstorm, the German attempt led by Erich von Manstein to relieve the trapped army from the south, and intentionally successful. The cross-country ability of the German tanks in snow may have slowed their relief attempts, By December 19th, the German army had pushed within 48 kilometers of the Sixth Army's positions. The encircled forces at Stalingrad made no attempt to break out or link up with Manstein's advance. Some German officers requested that Paulus defy Hitler's orders and stand fast and instead attempt to break out of the Stalingrad pocket. Paulus refused on December 23rd, and the attempt to relieve Stalingrad was abandoned, and Manstein's forces switched over to the defensive to deal with new Soviet offensives. And here's another one. This one is called Operation Little Saturn. On December 16th, the Soviet forces launched Operation Little Saturn, which attempted to punch through the Axis army, mainly Italians, on the Don and take Rostov. The Germans set up a mobile defense of small units, which were to hold small towns until supporting armor arrived. From the Soviet bridgehead at Maman, 15 divisions supported by at least 100 tanks attacked the Italian Crossa and Ravenna divisions, and although outnumbered 9-1, the Italians intentionally fought well, with the Germans praising the quality of the Italian defenders. But on December 19th, the Italian lines disintegrated, and the ARMIR headquarters ordered that the battered divisions drew to new lines. The fighting forced the total relegation of the German situation. An attempt to break out through to Stalingrad was abandoned, and Army Group A was ordered to pull back from the Caucasus. Sixth Army was now beyond all hope of German relief. While motorized breakout may have been possible in the first few weeks, the Sixth Army now had insufficient fuel, and German soldiers would face greater difficulty breaking through the Soviet lines on foot in the harsh winter conditions. But in its defensive position on the Volga, Sixth Army continued to tie down a I can't pronounce it, number of Soviet armies. And that's pretty much it. And here is about the Soviet victory at the Battle of Stalingrad. The Germans, instead in the pocket, retreated from the suburbs of Stalingrad to the city itself. The losses of two airfields at I can't pronounce it, on January 16, 1943, and I can't remember, on the night of the 21st and 22nd of January, mean the end of air supplies and the evacuation of the wounded. The third and last serviceable runway was at Stalingrad-Kavkazia Flight School, which reportedly had the last landings and takeoffs on the night of the 22nd and 23rd of January. After daybreak on January 24th, there were no more reported landings to expect intermittent airdrops of ammunition, food until the end. The Germans were not only starving but running out of ammunition. Nevertheless, they continued to resist. In part, they believed that the Soviets would execute any who surrendered. In particular, the so-called MHIWIS, Soviet citizens fighting for the Germans, had no illusions about their fate if captured. The Soviets intentionally surprised by the number of Germans they trapped and had to reinforce their encircled troops. The bloody urban warfare began again in Stalingrad, but this time it was the Germans who were pushed back to the banks of the Volga. The Germans adopted the simple defense of fixing wire nets over all windows to protect themselves from grenades. The Soviets responded by fixing fish hooks into grenades so they could be stuck in nets when thrown. The Germans had no unseizable tanks in the city, and those that are still functional could at best be used as makeshift pillboxes. The Soviets did not bother employing tanks in the areas where the urban destruction restricted their mobility. A low-level Soviet envoy party comprising of Major Alexander Smitful, I can't remember, carried an offer to Paulus if he surrendered within 24 hours. He would receive a guaranteed safety of all prisoners, medical care for the sick and the wounded, and prisoners would be allowed to keep their personal belongings in normal food rations and price to any country they'd wish after the war. But Paulus, ordered not to surrender by Hitler, didn't respond. On January 22nd, Paulus requested that he be granted permission to surrender. Hitler rejected it on one point of honor. He telegraphed the Sixth Army later that day, claiming that it had made an historic contribution to the greatest struggle in German history, and that it should stand fast to the last soldier and the last bullet. Hitler told Goebbels that the plague of the Sixth Army was a heroic drama of German history. On January 26, 1943, the German forces inside Stalingrad split into two pockets. The northern pocket centered on the tractor factory, and the smaller southern pocket in the city center. The northern pocket was tactically commanded by General Walter Hess, while the southern pocket was commanded by Paulus. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's coming to power, Goebbels read out a proclamation that the sentence included: "The heroic struggle of our soldiers on the Volga should be a warning for anybody to do the utmost for the struggle of Germany's freedom and the future of our people, and thus, in a wider sense, for the maintenance of the entire continent." Hitler promoted Paulus to the rank of field marshal. No German field marshal had ever surrendered, and the implication was clear. If Paulus surrendered, he would shame himself and would become the highest-ranking German officer ever to be captured. Hitler believed that Paulus would either fight to the last man or commit suicide. Paulus, however, commented, "I have no intention of shooting myself for this Bowman corporal." The next day, the southern pocket in Stalingrad collapsed. Soviet forces reached the entrance to the German headquarters in the ruined GUM department store. General Schmidt negotiated a surrender of the headquarters while Paulus waited in the other room. When interrogated by the Soviets, Paulus claimed that he had not surrendered. He said that he had been taken by surprise. He denied that he was the commander of the remaining northern pocket in Stalingrad, and refused to issue an order in his name for them to surrender. 4 Soviet armies were deployed against the remaining northern pocket. At 4 in the morning on February 2nd, General Stricker was informed that one of his own officers had gone to the Soviets to negotiate surrender terms. Seeing no point in continuing, he sent a radio message saying that his command, he has done his duty and fought to the last man, that he surrendered. Around 91,000 exhausted, ill, wounded, and starving prisoners were taken, including 3,000 Romanians, the survivors of the 20th Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and I can't remember. The prisoners include 22 generals. Hitler was furious and confided that Paulus could free himself from all sorrow and insets in eternally and national immorality, but he prefers to go to Moscow. So, in other words, so far, like, you guys can understand that, you know, like I said, the Battle of Stalingrad was considered as the most brutal battle in the history of warfare. Like, you know, nothing compares to that. Not even, not even the Battle of Berlin. And that. Or, the Battle of Berlin was, you know, brutal in nature itself, but Stalingrad was probably like I said, the single largest and bloodiest battle in the history of warfare, because both sides kept on pouring in reinforcements. So it was pretty, yeah. And then I'm gonna read you the aftermath. The German public was not officially told that of the impending disaster until the end of January 1943. Through positive media reports had stopped in the weeks before the announcement. Stalingrad marked the first time that the Nazi government publicly acknowledged a failure in its war effort. It is not only the first major setback of the German army, but a crushing defeat where the German losses were almost equal those of the Soviets was unprecedented. Prior losses of the Soviet Union were generally 3 times as high as the German ones. January regularly programming on the German state radio was replaced by a broadcast of a somber, I can't remember, some movement from to the 7th Symphony, followed by the announcement of the defeat at Stalingrad. On February 18th, the Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, gave the famous Sports Palace speech in Berlin, encouraging the Germans to accept a total war that would claim all resources and efforts from the entire population. Based on the Soviet records, over 10,000 soldiers continued to resist in isolated groups within the city for the next month. Some have presumed that they were motivated by the belief that the fighting was on the better than slow death in Soviet captivity. Is the Israeli historian Omar Bartov claims that they were the motive by National Socialism. He'd studied 11,237 letters sent by soldiers inside of Stalingrad between the 20th of December 1942 and the 16th of January 1943 to their families in Germany. Almost every letter expressed their belief in Germany's ultimate victory and their willingness to fight and die at Stalingrad to achieve that victory. Bartov reported that a great many of soldiers were all aware that they would not be able to escape from Stalingrad, but their letters to the families would boast them they were They were proud to sacrifice themselves for the Führer. The remaining forces continued to resist, hiding in cellars and sewers, but in early March 1943, the remaining small, isolated pockets resisted had surrendered. According to the Soviet intelligence document, shown in a documentary, a remarkable NKVD report from March 1943 is available, showing intactly of some of these German groups. The mop-up of counter-revolutionary elements in the city of Stalingrad preceded. The Germans, who had hidden themselves in huts and trenches, offered armed resistance after combat actions had already ended. This armed resistance continued until February 15th, and in a few areas until February 20th. Most of the armed groups were liquidated by March. During the period of the armed conflict with the Germans, the brigades units killed 2,418 soldiers and officers and captured 8,646 soldiers and officers, escorting them to POW camps and handing them over. The operative report from the Don's front staff, issued on February 20th and 22nd, February 5th, 1942, at 2200, said the 46th Army pulled itself in order, being previously in the previously occupied regions. In the location of the Army's units, it had previously in the region, the location of 38 motorized rifle brigade. In the basement, 18 armed SS men were found, who refused to surrender, and the Germans were found and they were destroyed. So you can all understand that, you know, the Battle of Stalingrad, you know, is considered the most brutal and bloody battle in the history of warfare. And, you know, and this is a time that we remember those remember the Soviet victory over National Socialism. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. So. Yeah. So, anyways, this has been another edition of my show, The Stuart Dahl Show. For you young people, you stay in school, stay out of trouble, and you'll do fine. And for now, Auf Wiedersehen, peace, and bye-bye, and stay cool, my friends.